The autumn of 1868 brought the bloodiest tribal conflict the Oregon Territory had ever witnessed. As bitter winds carried the scent of gunpowder across the valleys of the Cascade Range, Rebecca Caldwell found herself alone in a remote cabin, tending to a wounded stranger who had collapsed at her doorstep. Little did she know that the unconscious Modoc warrior bleeding onto her father's hand-carved table was the son of Chief Kintpuash himself. While she worked desperately to save his life, his warriors were already searching for their missing leader, and Rebecca's act of compassion would soon lead to an impossible demand that would forever alter both their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Caldwell stared at the darkening sky through the cabin's small window, watching as ominous clouds gathered over the mountains. The first drops of rain began to strike the glass, distorting her view of the dense pine forest that surrounded her family's homestead. 3 months earlier, her life had held such promise. She and her father Edward had journeyed west from Illinois with dreams of establishing a successful timber operation in the Oregon Territory. The modest parcel of land they'd purchased sat in a valley rich with old-growth pine, and Edward had worked tirelessly to construct their cabin before winter arrived. He'd planned to begin felling trees and establishing contacts with the growing settlements once they were properly settled, but Edward would never see those plans fulfilled. 2 weeks ago, while clearing additional land behind the cabin, a massive pine had fallen unpredictably, crushing him beneath its weight. Rebecca had heard his scream and run to find him, but it was already too late. His body lay broken and still, his eyes staring sightlessly at the forest canopy above. With trembling hands she had dug his grave herself, marking it with a cross fashioned from the very tree that had taken his life. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her, but there had been no time for extended grief. Survival demanded her attention. Rebecca was 24, unmarried but not unworldly. Back in Illinois, she had worked alongside her father in their small general store after her mother's death from influenza years earlier. She knew how to keep ledgers, stock inventory, and haggle with suppliers. But none of those skills helped her now. Alone in the wilderness with winter approaching and dwindling supplies, the nearest settlement, Riverton, was nearly 20 miles away through difficult terrain. A journey she'd made once with her father, after they'd established their cabin, but never alone. The trip would take at least 2 days on foot, and with the weather worsening, such a journey seemed increasingly dangerous. Rebecca had sent letters east to her only remaining family, an aunt and uncle in Chicago. But even in the best conditions, mail took weeks to reach Illinois from the Oregon Territory. No help would come from that direction in time. As darkness fell and the rain intensified, Rebecca moved away from the window. The small cabin felt oppressively quiet without her father's deep voice or the familiar sound of his boots on the wooden floor. She added another log to the fire, calculating how long her woodpile would last if the weather continued to worsen. 2 weeks, perhaps 3 if she was careful. She would need to venture into the forest soon to gather more, a task her father had always handled. Rebecca knew the basics of wielding an axe. He had insisted she learn. But felling trees properly required strength and experience she wasn't sure she possessed. Her food stores were somewhat better. There was salt pork, flour, beans, coffee, and dried apples to last through most of the winter. Her father had been an avid hunter, teaching her to set simple snares for rabbits, which supplemented their meals. But the larger game that would see her comfortably through the winter months, deer and elk, required hunting skills beyond her current abilities. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself, echoing her father's favorite saying when challenges seemed overwhelming. Rebecca prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, eating mechanically while reviewing her situation. When her father died, her first instinct had been to abandon the homestead and return east. but the journey required money she didn't have, and selling the land from this remote location was virtually impossible without traveling to Oregon City, nearly 100 miles away. So she had stayed, hoping to either make the homestead viable enough to attract a buyer in the spring or to somehow continue what her father had started. Neither option seemed particularly promising as she sat alone in the growing darkness, listening to the rain hammer against the cabin roof. The storm intensified through the night, evolving from steady rain to a howling tempest that rattled the cabin's shutters and sent gusts of wind down the chimney, causing the fire to sputter and smoke. Rebecca slept fitfully, waking at each new sound, her mind constructing threats from the darkness. Dawn brought little relief as the storm continued. Unabated, Rebecca moved through her morning routine by rote, stoking the fire, preparing a simple breakfast, checking her supplies. She had hoped to set snares for rabbits, but the weather made that impossible. By midday, the rain had turned to sleet, coating the trees and ground with a treacherous glaze of ice. Rebecca stood at the door, looking out at the transformed landscape. With growing concern, if the temperature dropped further and heavy snow followed, she could be truly trapped. The sound came just after she had closed the door, a heavy thud against the outside wall, followed by what seemed like scratching. Rebecca froze, her heart pounding. Bears were common in these woods, and while they generally avoided human dwellings, hunger as winter approached could make them bold. She reached for her father's rifle, which hung loaded above the fireplace, just as he had taught her. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it down, feeling its reassuring weight. "Hello?" she called out, her voice wavering. "Is someone there?" The scratching continued, now moving toward the door. Rebecca steeled herself, positioning the rifle, as her father had shown her, though she doubted her ability to use it effectively if truly threatened. A voice responded, weak, barely audible above the storm. "Help! Not a bear, then? A person?" Rebecca hesitated, caution warring with compassion. Travelers seldom pass this way, especially in such weather, but someone clearly needed assistance. "I'm opening the door," she announced, keeping the rifle within reach. "But I'm armed." When she pulled the door open, cold wind and sleet rushed in, momentarily blinding her. As her vision cleared, she found herself staring down at a man collapsed on her threshold. He lay face down, one arm outstretched as if he had been crawling. A dark liquid that could only be blood pooled beneath him, already being diluted by the sleet. Rebecca's initial shock gave way to instinctive action. She set aside the rifle and knelt beside the stranger, turning him carefully to assess his condition. As she did, she gasped, nearly recoiling. The man before her was unlike any she had encountered. His copper skin and straight black hair marked him as Native American. He wore buckskin leggings and a shirt adorned with intricate beadwork, now torn and bloodied. A knife in an ornate sheath remained at his belt, though he appeared to have lost any other weapons he might have carried. Most alarming was the arrow embedded in his side. The shaft had broken, leaving only a few inches protruding from between his ribs, but blood continued to seep from the wound, staining the buckskins. Dark. Rebecca hesitated only briefly. Whatever this man's origins or circumstances, he would die without help. The nearest doctor was in Riverton, impossibly far in this weather, and the stranger wouldn't survive such a journey even if it were possible. With determination born of necessity, she grasped him beneath the arms and began to drag him inside, struggling with his weight. He was tall, at least 6 feet, and solidly built, though currently limp in unconsciousness. By the time she had pulled him fully into the cabin and closed the door against the storm, Rebecca was breathless with exertion. She couldn't leave him on the floor. With effort, she cleared her father's workbench, pushing aside tools and half-finished woodworking projects. Then, summoning all her strength, she managed to half-drag, half-lift the unconscious man onto the table. In the firelight, she could better assess his condition. The man appeared to be in his 30s, with strong features and a face that, even in unconsciousness, conveyed dignity. Besides the arrow wound, he had various cuts and bruises, suggesting he had been in some kind of fight or had traveled through difficult terrain while injured. Rebecca knew she needed to remove the arrow, but her medical knowledge was limited to basic first aid. Her mother had been skilled with herbal remedies, but Rebecca had been too young when she died to learn more than rudimentary care. Still, she had to try. She gathered clean cloths, her sewing kit, the bottle of whiskey her father had saved for medicinal purposes, and a sharp knife that she quickly sterilized in the fire. The man remained unconscious, which was a blessing considering what she needed to do. Rebecca cut away the buckskin shirt around the wound, exposing the arrow embedded between his ribs. The area was swollen and hot to the touch, signs of infection already setting in. With trembling hands, she poured whiskey over the wound and her knife. Then, taking a deep breath to steady herself, she carefully widened the wound to assess how deeply the arrowhead was embedded. The man groaned, but didn't wake, his body twitching. Slightly under her hands, blood welled up, making it difficult to see. Rebecca worked methodically, fighting down her nausea as she probed the wound. The arrowhead had lodged against a rib, which had likely prevented it from penetrating deeper and causing more damage. Using the knife as a lever, she carefully worked the arrowhead loose, finally extracting it with a sickening sound. Fresh blood flowed, alarmingly bright. Rebecca quickly pressed a clean cloth against the wound, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed. Then she cleaned the area as thoroughly as possible with more whiskey before stitching the wound closed with neat, small stitches as her mother had taught her years ago when mending delicate fabrics. Throughout the procedure, the man remained mercifully unconscious, though his breathing grew more labored and a sheen of sweat covered his face despite the cabin's chill. When Rebecca had finished bandaging the wound, she covered him with a blanket and built up the fire to ward off the cold that could kill as surely as his injuries. Only then did she consider the implications of what she had done. She had brought a Native American warrior into her home and treated his wounds, a man who might well be considered an enemy by the settlers in Riverton and beyond. The Modoc troubles had been brewing for months, with increasing reports of skirmishes and raids as white settlers encroached further onto tribal lands. Rebecca had paid little attention to these conflicts, focusing instead on establishing their homestead. Her father, while not hostile toward the native populations, had advised caution and limited contact. "They have their ways, we have ours," he had said pragmatically. "Best not to interfere in matters that don't concern us directly." But now one of them lay on her table, his life in her hands. She had made her choice the moment she dragged him through the door, driven by basic human compassion rather than political considerations. Whatever the consequences, she would see it through. As evening approached, the storm showed no signs of abating. The sleet had turned to snow, falling heavily and beginning to accumulate against the cabin walls. The temperature continued to drop, making Rebecca grateful for the substantial woodpile her father had accumulated before his death. She checked on her patient periodically, noting with concern that fever had set in. His skin burned to the touch, and he occasionally murmured in a language she didn't understand, his head turning restlessly on the makeshift pillow she had provided. Rebecca prepared a broth from her precious stores, hoping to coax some nourishment into him if he regained consciousness. She also made a poultice of dried herbs from her mother's small medicine box, applying it to the wound in hopes of drawing out the infection. As night fell completely, Rebecca sat by the fire, watching the stranger and contemplating her situation. She had no way of knowing who he was, or how he had come to be wounded and alone near her cabin. Had he been separated from his people during some conflict? Was he being pursued? Might others come looking for him? The implications of that last Question sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. If this man was involved in the conflicts between settlers and natives, others from either side might come searching, and neither would look kindly on what she had done. Shortly before midnight, the warrior's eyes suddenly flew open. He stared at the cabin ceiling in confusion before trying to sit up, gasping in pain as the movement pulled at his stitches. Rebecca moved quickly to his side, placing a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Be still," she said, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. "You're injured." The man's dark eyes fixed on her face, wariness and confusion evident in his gaze. He spoke, his voice rough from disuse, in a language Rebecca didn't understand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm sorry," she said, shaking her head. "I don't know your words." He studied her for a long moment before speaking again, this time in heavily accented but understandable English. "Where am I? Who are you?" "My cabin," Rebecca answered simply. "I'm Rebecca Caldwell. I found you collapsed outside during the storm. You have an arrow wound that I treated as best I could, but you've developed a fever." He glanced down at his bandaged side, then back to her face, his expression inscrutable. "Why did you help me?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. It seemed so fundamental to her that anyone in need deserved assistance that she hadn't considered. "You were injured," she said finally. "You would have died in the storm." The warrior continued to study her face, as if searching for some hidden motive. Finally, he spoke again. "I am Takelma, son of Chief Kintpuash of the Modoc people." Rebecca felt a jolt of recognition at the chief's name, which had been mentioned in discussions about the conflicts. If this man was truly the chief's son, she had inadvertently inserted herself into tribal politics far beyond her understanding. Before she could respond, Takelma continued, his voice weakening with the effort of speaking. "Our hunting party was attacked by soldiers from the fort. We were separated in the fighting. I took an arrow from one of their Indian scouts." His eyes began to close, the brief surge of energy fading. "My father will reward you for your help," he murmured, already slipping back into unconsciousness. "When my people find me?" Rebecca stood frozen beside the table, his words echoing in her mind. "When my people find me?" If soldiers were pursuing Takelma and his hunting party, if conflict was actively occurring in these woods, her isolated cabin was suddenly at the center of a dangerous situation she barely comprehended. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the forest in deepening white. The wind howled around the cabin's eaves like a living thing, while inside, Rebecca watched the steady rise and fall of Takelma's chest, wondering what chain of events she had set in motion by this simple act of human compassion. One thing was certain: her life, already altered irrevocably by her father's death, had just become infinitely more complicated. As dawn approached, Rebecca added more wood to the fire and prepared herself for whatever the coming day might bring. The storm raged for 3 more days, transforming the landscape into an unrecognizable expanse of white. Snowdrifts piled against the cabin walls, and icicles hung like crystal daggers from the eaves. Rebecca found herself essentially trapped with her unexpected patient, cut off from the outside world by an impenetrable blanket of snow and ice. Takelma's condition worsened before it improved. The fever that had taken hold burned through him like wildfire, leaving him delirious and weakened. Rebecca spent hours bathing his forehead with cool cloths, forcing sips of water and broth between his cracked lips, and changing the poultice on his wound when infection threatened to overwhelm her rudimentary medical skills. On the second night, she feared he wouldn't survive until morning. His breathing had grown shallow and irregular, his skin hot and dry to the touch. Rebecca found herself praying for the first time since her father's death, whispering desperate pleas into the darkness. "Please don't die," she murmured, more to herself than to him, as she wrung out another cloth and placed it on his forehead. "I don't want to be alone with another death on my conscience." To her surprise, Takelma's eyes fluttered open at her words. They were glassy with fever, but somehow focused on her face. "You are not responsible for your father," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Rebecca froze. She had mentioned her father's death while talking to Takelma during his fever, not certain he could hear or understand her. It had been a form of therapy, speaking aloud the guilt she carried for not having prevented the accident somehow. "You understood me," she said, momentarily forgetting his critical condition in her surprise. "Pieces," he admitted, his eyes closing, again with exhaustion. "Enough." Rebecca hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. "How do you speak English so well?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Mission school. 4 years. Before I ran away." His breathing deepened as he slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Rebecca to contemplate this new information. She had assumed, like many settlers, that the Modoc were simply savages with little exposure to white society. The realization that Takelma had spent years in a mission school added complexity to her understanding of him. By dawn, the crisis had passed. Takelma's fever broke, leaving him soaked in sweat but breathing more easily. Rebecca, who had kept vigil through the night, nearly wept with relief when she felt his cooler forehead. As the 4th day dawned and the storm finally began to abate, Rebecca faced practical challenges. She had used more firewood than anticipated, depleting her carefully stacked supply. The roof had developed a small leak in one corner, requiring immediate attention, and caring for Takelma had consumed food resources faster than she had planned. She was in the midst of rationing her remaining supplies when Takelma spoke from the table where he still lay, too weak to move much. "You need wood," he observed, his voice stronger than it had been, but still raspy from disuse. Rebecca turned, surprised to find him awake and lucid. "Yes," she acknowledged, "but the snow's still too deep to go far into the forest." Takelma pushed himself up on one elbow, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing wound. "There are deadfalls closer than you think, behind your cabin, just beyond the clearing." "How would you know that?" Rebecca asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. His expression remained impassive. "I watched this cabin for 3 days before the attack. My father wanted to know who had settled here." The admission sent a chill through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "You were spying on us?" "Observing," he corrected. "It is our land. We know everyone who builds upon it." Rebecca wanted to argue, to point out that her father had purchased the land legally, but she recognized the futility of such an argument. Instead, she focused on the practical matter at hand. "These deadfalls, are they large?" "Small enough for you to manage with an axe," Takelma replied. "But you must be careful. The snow makes everything treacherous." Rebecca nodded, making a decision. Despite her lingering wariness, she needed the wood, and Takelma seemed to be offering genuine help. She retrieved her father's heavy coat, axe, and a rope to drag back whatever she could manage. "I'll be back," she said, heading for the door. "Try not to move too much, you'll reopen your wound." Takelma watched her with an inscrutable expression. "I will be here." Something in his tone, a hint of dry humor perhaps, made her pause. Is that a promise or a threat? For the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his stoic features. Neither. Simply a fact. Outside, the world had been transformed into a crystalline wonderland. The storm had left nearly 2 feet of snow, with deeper drifts, where the wind had shaped it into flowing sculptures. The sky above was a brilliant blue, the air so clear and cold it hurt to breathe. Rebecca made her way carefully around the cabin, following Takelma's directions. Sure enough, beyond the clearing where her father had been expanding their land, several fallen pine branches lay partially buried in snow. Some appeared to have come down during the recent storm, while others were older deadfalls that had been there for some time. As she worked to clear the snow and chop the wood into manageable pieces, Rebecca reflected on her strange situation. Here she was, following the advice of a Modoc warrior who had admitted to spying on her home, a man who by all conventional wisdom should be considered her enemy. Yet something about Takelma inspired a cautious trust. Perhaps it was the straightforward way he spoke, without artifice or flattery. Perhaps it was how, even in his weakened state, he had immediately recognized her practical needs and offered solutions rather than demands. By midday, Rebecca had accumulated enough wood to last several more days. She dragged it back to the cabin in 3 loads, stacking it neatly by the door to dry before bringing it inside. When she finally returned to the cabin's warmth, her cheeks flushed from exertion and cold, she found Takelma sitting up on the edge of the table, clearly having attempted to stand before weakness forced him back down. "You should be resting," she admonished, quickly shedding her snow-covered outer garments. "I have rested enough," he replied, though the pallor of his skin and the way he cradled his wounded side belied his words. "I need to move, or I will grow weaker," Rebecca sighed, recognizing the stubborn determination in his expression. It reminded her of her father, who had never been a good patient during illnesses. "At least move to the chair by the fire," she suggested, gesturing to her father's hand-crafted rocking chair. "It will be more comfortable than the table." Takelma nodded his agreement, and Rebecca moved to help him. He was taller than she had realized when he was lying down, his frame lean but powerful even in his weakened state. He leaned on her shoulder as they crossed the small space to the chair, his steps unsteady but determined. "Thank you," he said simply as he settled into the chair, the single phrase conveying gratitude for more than just her physical assistance. Rebecca busied herself preparing a simple stew with dried meat and the last of her vegetables, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy of their shared space now that Takelma was fully conscious and upright. It was one thing to tend to an unconscious patient. It was quite another to share her small cabin with a fully aware man from a completely different culture. As she worked, Takelma observed her quietly. Finally, he broke the silence. "Your father built this cabin well," he commented. "Strong walls, good placement with the sun." Rebecca glanced up, surprised by the observation. Yes, he was very skilled with wood. He planned to start a timber business. "The forest would have provided for him," Takelma acknowledged, his tone neutral rather than accusatory. "As it has provided for my people for generations." Rebecca stirred the pot, considering her response. "Is that why your people were watching us? To see if we would take too much from the forest?" Takelma's expression grew more serious. "We watch all who settle here. Some come to build and live in balance. Others come to strip the land and leave. My father believes we must know the difference." "And what did you decide about us?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious. "Your father worked with respect," Takelma replied after a thoughtful pause. "He took only the trees he needed, left the young ones standing. He hunted for food, not sport." His gaze met hers directly. "We decided to wait and watch longer before making judgment." The simple assessment of her father brought unexpected tears to Rebecca's eyes. Somehow, this stranger from a completely different world had recognized something essential about Edward Caldwell, his fundamental decency and respect for the natural world, that many of his own kind had never appreciated. "He would have been honored by that assessment," she said quietly, turning back to the stew to hide her emotion. They ate in companionable silence as dusk settled over the forest. Through the cabin's small windows, Rebecca could see the snow beginning to glow with an ethereal blue light as the moon rose. The storm had passed, but the deep snow would keep them isolated for days yet. As if reading her thoughts, Takelma spoke. "Your supplies will not last long with 2 people. We'll manage," Rebecca replied, though she had been making the same calculations with growing concern. "The snow will melt eventually." "Not soon enough," Takelma countered. "I can help." Rebecca raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You can barely walk across the room." "I grow stronger each day," he insisted, "and I know how to set snares that will work even in deep snow." "My father taught me some basic snares," Rebecca said. "But not Modoc snares," Takelma replied with the first hint of pride she had heard in his voice. "Our ways are different, better for winter." Rebecca considered the offer. She was running dangerously low on meat, and the thought of fresh rabbit or squirrel was tempting. But allowing Takelma to help meant extending their unusual partnership, acknowledging a mutual dependence she hadn't fully accepted. "Why would you help me?" she asked directly. "I saved your life, yes, but that debt is being repaid with my supplies. And firewood. You owe me nothing more." Takelma regarded her steadily. "My people do not measure debts so precisely. You took me in when I was your enemy by the standards of your kind. You used your medicines and food when you had little to spare." He gestured to the cabin around them. "You are alone and vulnerable in a harsh season. These things matter more than ledger books." The reference to ledger books, so specific to white culture, reminded Rebecca again that Takelma's understanding of her world was more nuanced than she had initially assumed. "All right," she conceded. "Show me these superior Modoc snares tomorrow, if you're strong enough." Takelma nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. The following morning brought clear skies and slightly warmer temperatures that began to settle the snow. Takelma, true to his word, demonstrated how to construct snares using materials from Rebecca's limited supplies, augmented by his knowledge of natural alternatives. "The wire is good," he acknowledged, examining her father's snare wire. "But 2, visible in snow, use these instead for the trigger mechanism." He showed her how to harvest and prepare certain plant fibers that remained pliable even in winter, and how to position the snares in locations animals would frequent despite the snow cover. "Look for signs," he instructed, pointing to barely perceptible depressions in the snow near the cabin. "These are rabbit runs. They create tunnels beneath the snow between feeding areas." Rebecca watched and learned, struck by how easily he conveyed knowledge that had clearly been passed down through generations. There was no condescension in his teaching, only a practical sharing of information necessary for survival. They set 6 snares in strategic locations within easy distance of the cabin, as Takelma was still not strong enough for extended walks through the deep snow. By evening, 2 had yielded results, a plump rabbit and a squirrel that would supplement their dwindling supplies. As Rebecca prepared the meat, Takelma sat by the fire, carefully carving a piece of pine with a small knife she had provided. His long fingers worked with precision, shaping the wood with practiced ease. "What are you making?" she asked, curious about his focused attention on the project. "A better knife," he replied, showing her how he was creating a handle for a blade. He had fashioned from a piece of metal he'd found among her father's tools. "The one you lent me is too small for proper skinning." Rebecca watched as he worked, impressed by his craftsmanship despite limited tools and materials. "You're very skilled." "My grandfather was our tribe's best toolmaker," Takelma explained, testing the fit of the blade in the wooden handle. "He began teaching me when I was still a small boy." This glimpse into his childhood prompted Rebecca to ask more. "And your parents, what did they teach you?" Takelma's hands stilled momentarily. My mother died when I was young, like yours. My father taught me leadership, strategy, how to read people, both our kind and yours. He resumed his carving. He sent me to the mission school to learn the white man's words and ways, believing this knowledge would help our people navigate the changes coming to our lands. But you ran away, Rebecca prompted, remembering his earlier comment. A shadow crossed his face. The teachers there believed they needed to kill the Indian to save the man. They beat children for speaking our language, cut our hair, forbade our stories and songs. His voice remained even despite the painful memories. I learned what I needed, then returned to my people. Rebecca felt a swell of shame on behalf of her culture. I'm sorry, she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate. Takelma glanced up, his expression softening slightly. You are not responsible for others' actions, just as I told you about your father's death. He tested the knife's edge with his thumb. Each person must be judged by their own choices. The simple wisdom of his statement struck Rebecca deeply. How often had she made assumptions about others based on their race or background, rather than their individual character? Yet here was Takelma, who had every reason to hate all white settlers based on his experiences, still willing to judge her on her own merits. Your knife is impressive, she said, changing the subject as she served their rabbit stew. You've created something useful from scraps. Necessity teaches adaptation, he replied, accepting the bowl she offered. My people have always used what is available, whether from nature or trade. As they ate, Rebecca found herself increasingly comfortable in Takelma's presence. The initial wariness had given way to a tentative respect, an acknowledgement of their mutual dependence in these difficult circumstances. Over the following days, as Takelma's strength gradually returned and the snow slowly began to melt in patches where the sun hit strongest, they established a routine that made the most of their complementary skills. Rebecca maintained the cabin, cooked their meals, and ventured increasingly farther into the forest for firewood as paths became navigable. Takelma set and checked the snares daily, skinned and prepared whatever game they caught, and began fashioning. More tools from available materials, a better fishing spear for when the stream thawed, a sturdier axe handle to replace her father's cracked one, a set of wooden bowls to supplement her limited dishware. Each day brought new conversations, new exchanges of knowledge. Rebecca taught Takelma her mother's method for preserving meat with limited salt. He showed her how to identify edible early spring plants that would soon emerge from beneath the snow. She explained her father's system for stacking wood to promote proper drying. He demonstrated Modoc techniques for weather prediction based on cloud patterns and animal behavior. In the evenings, they shared stories. Rebecca of her childhood in Illinois, the general store her parents had run, her mother's illness and death, the long journey west with her father. Takelma spoke of Modoc traditions, the seasonal movements of his tribe between hunting grounds, the ceremonies that marked important life transitions, the increasing tensions with white settlers and the army as their traditional lands were steadily encroached upon. My father seeks peace, he explained one evening as they sat by the fire, the wind whistling outside in the darkness. But peace with dignity and sufficient land for our people to live, as they always have. The reservation they offer us is poor land, crowded with other tribes who were once our enemies. Rebecca considered this information thoughtfully. The newspapers in Riverton had portrayed the Modoc as obstinate troublemakers refusing reasonable government accommodations. Takelma's perspective offered a very different picture. What will happen? She asked, dreading his answer. Takelma's expression grew grim. War, I fear, not of our choosing, but forced upon us. The army builds up forces at the fort. They send more Indian scouts to track our movements. He touched his healing side where the arrow had struck. They already attack hunting parties without provocation. And your father? What does Chief Kinpuash plan to do? He still seeks a middle path, Takelma replied, but fewer of our warriors listen. Many believe fighting is now inevitable. He looked directly at Rebecca, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Once the snow clears enough for travel, they will come looking for me. My father would not abandon his son. The statement hung in the air between them, a reminder that their unusual partnership was temporary, bound to end when the winter released its grip on the land. Rebecca felt an unexpected pang at the thought. "And when will they find you?" She asked quietly. "I will return to my people," he said simply. "Where I belong." Rebecca nodded, attempting to hide her complicated emotions. Of course he would return to his tribe. What else had she expected? Yet the prospect of being alone again, after these weeks of shared work and conversation, felt suddenly bleak. "You have been kind to me, Rebecca Caldwell," Takelma continued, using her full name in the formal way he sometimes did during serious conversations. "My father will want to thank you properly for saving his son's life." "That isn't necessary," she began, but Takelma raised a hand to stop her protest. "It is necessary by our ways," he insisted. "A life debt is sacred to the Modoc. It cannot go unacknowledged." Rebecca sighed, recognizing the determination in his tone. "Very well. When the time comes, I'll accept your father's thanks." Little did she know how that acceptance would transform her future in ways she could never have imagined. March arrived with the first genuine thaw, transforming the forest around Rebecca's cabin from a frozen wasteland into a muddy, dripping landscape of renewal. The icicles that had hung like sentinels from the eaves gave way to steady drips that carved channels in the remaining snow. Patches of dark earth emerged in sun-exposed areas, and the stream that had been locked beneath ice for months began to flow audibly once more. With the changing season came a shift in the dynamic between Rebecca and Takelma. His wound had healed remarkably well. A puckered scar remained, but he moved with increasing ease, no longer favoring his injured side. His strength returned more fully each day, and with it came a restlessness Rebecca could sense, but didn't mention. Both understood that the improving weather meant their unusual arrangement would soon end. The snow-blocked trails would become passable, allowing Takelma to return to his people, and Rebecca to resume her solitary existence, or perhaps make the journey to Riverton to seek a more sustainable future. The knowledge cast a shadow over their daily interactions, though neither spoke of it directly. Instead, they focused on preparations. Takelma showing Rebecca additional survival skills she might need, Rebecca ensuring he would be strong enough for the journey ahead. They were checking fishing traps Takelma had designed for the newly flowing stream when they heard it, a distinctive bird call that made him freeze mid-motion, his head tilting to catch the sound. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, instantly alert to his change in demeanor. "Not a bird," he replied quietly, scanning the forest edge. "A signal. My people are near." A mixture of emotions crossed his face, relief, anticipation, and something like regret. Rebecca felt her heart quicken with apprehension. She had known this moment would come, but facing reality was different from abstract knowledge. Takelma straightened, cupping his hands around his mouth, and returned the call with a slight variation. The sound echoed through the trees, answered, almost immediately by another call from a different direction. "They are coming," he said, turning to Rebecca. 4 or 5 warriors based on the signals." "How do you want to handle this?" she asked, suddenly conscious of how their situation might appear to others, a white woman and a Modoc warrior living together in an isolated cabin. Takelma seemed to understand her concern. "Let me speak first," he advised. "Stay calm and make no sudden movements. They will be wary but not hostile once they understand what has happened." Rebecca nodded, struggling to maintain her composure as movement appeared at the forest edge. 4 figures emerged from the trees, moving with the fluid grace of men accustomed to forest travel. They were dressed similarly to Takelma in buckskins and carried rifles along with traditional weapons. Their faces were painted with red and black markings that Rebecca assumed held significance she couldn't interpret. The warriors approached cautiously, their expression shifting from wariness to barely contained joy as they recognized Takelma. The leader, a tall man with a scar running from temple to jaw, spoke rapidly in the Modoc language, his eyes darting between Takelma and Rebecca. Takelma responded calmly, gesturing toward Rebecca and then to his healed wound. The conversation continued for several minutes, with occasional glances in her direction that ranged from curious to skeptical to grudgingly respectful. Finally, Takelma turned to Rebecca. "This is Black Fox," he said, indicating the scarred warrior. "My father's most trusted scout. They have been searching for me since the attack, believing me dead or captured when they could not find my body." Rebecca inclined her head respectfully toward Black Fox, who studied her with intense scrutiny before offering a slight nod in return. "I have explained how you found me wounded and cared for me through the winter," Takelma continued. "They are taking us to my father's camp." "Us?" Rebecca repeated, startled. "I'm not going to your camp." Takelma's expression grew serious. "You must. My father will want to thank you properly." And he hesitated, glancing at Black Fox, who had spoken again in their language. "And there are soldiers moving through this area. It is not safe for you to remain alone." Rebecca wanted to protest, but recognized the logic in his argument. If U.S. Army troops were indeed searching for Modoc in the region, being found harboring a wounded warrior or evidence of having done so could put her in significant danger. "How far is your father's camp?" she asked, already mentally cataloguing what she would need to bring. "Half a day's journey," Takelma replied. "We will leave at dawn tomorrow. The warriors will camp nearby tonight to ensure our safety." Rebecca spent the evening in a flurry of preparations, packing essential items and securing the cabin as best she could. She had no illusion that locks would keep out determined intruders, but she hoped to protect her remaining possessions from weather and forest animals during her absence. Throughout her tasks, she was acutely aware of the warriors moving around the perimeter of the clearing, maintaining a vigilant watch that both reassured and unnerved her. Takelma remained close to the cabin, often conferring with Black Fox in low tones that didn't carry to her ears. By nightfall, Rebecca's nerves were stretched thin with anticipation and uncertainty, sitting before the fire for what might be her last night in the cabin for some time. She finally voiced her deeper concerns. "What will happen to me in your father's camp?" she asked Takelma directly. "Will I be a guest or a prisoner?" Takelma looked surprised by the question. "Neither. You will be honored as one who saved the chief's son. But I'm still a white woman among people who have every reason to distrust my kind," Rebecca pointed out. He considered this, then answered with characteristic honesty. "There will be those who view you with suspicion at first, but my father is respected, and his word carries weight. If he declares you a friend, you will be treated as such." He paused. "Do you fear us so much?" The simple question gave Rebecca pause. Did she fear the Modoc? She had been raised with stories of Indian savagery, had seen newspaper accounts of alleged atrocities, had absorbed the casual prejudices of frontier settlements. Yet her time with Takelma had revealed a thoughtful, honorable man with a rich cultural heritage, hardly the savage of popular imagination. "I fear the unknown," she answered finally, "and stepping alone into a community that might see me as the enemy." "Not alone," Takelma corrected gently. "I will be beside you." The simple statement offered more comfort than elaborate reassurances might have, and Rebecca nodded, accepting the reality of what tomorrow would bring. They departed at first light, Rebecca having secured the cabin and packed a small bundle of personal items. Black Fox led the way, with 2 warriors flanking them and a 4th bringing up the rear. Takelma walked beside Rebecca, occasionally helping her navigate difficult terrain. Their route took them deeper into the forest than Rebecca had ever ventured, following game trails and natural pathways that were invisible to her untrained eye. They crossed streams swollen with snowmelt, traversed rocky ridges, and moved through stands of ancient pines that towered overhead like nature's cathedral. Despite her apprehension about their destination, Rebecca found herself marveling at the landscape's beauty. Spring was awakening the forest. Tender green shoots pushed up through the leaf litter, early wildflowers dotted sunny clearings, and birdsong filled the air after winter's relative silence. "Your land is beautiful," she said to Takelma during a brief rest beside a small waterfall. "Our land," he corrected, but without rancor. "It has sustained my people for countless generations." He gestured to a distant peak. "My grandfather's grandfather is buried on that mountain. His songs are still sung at our ceremonies." The perspective of a connection to place that spanned not years but generations was foreign to Rebecca's experience. Her own family had moved several times during her childhood, always seeking better opportunities, never developing the bone-deep attachment to land that Takelma expressed. They reached the Modoc camp in late afternoon. Rebecca saw smoke from cooking fires before the settlement itself came into view, nestled in a protected valley with a clear lake at its center. Unlike the teepees she had expected based on illustrations she'd seen of Indian camps, the Modoc dwellings were a mixture of traditional structures, some dome-shaped wickiups covered with tule mats, others more substantial earthen lodges partially dug into the ground for better insulation. Their approach was noted immediately. Children playing at the settlement's edge spotted them first, raising a clamor that brought adults hurrying from various tasks. Within moments, they were surrounded by a growing crowd of Modoc men, women, and children, all straining to see Takelma and the unexpected white woman at his side. The reactions were as varied as the faces: joy at seeing Takelma alive, curiosity about Rebecca, suspicion from some of the older warriors, open wonder from the children who perhaps had never seen a white woman up close before. Black Fox raised his hand for silence, then spoke in rapid Modoc, presumably explaining their arrival. The crowd parted, creating a path toward a larger structure at the center of the camp. Takelma touched Rebecca's elbow lightly, guiding her forward through the gauntlet of staring faces. "My father's lodge," he explained quietly. "He will receive us there." Rebecca straightened her shoulders and walked beside him, conscious of being the object of intense scrutiny. She had dressed in her most practical clothes for the journey: sturdy boots, her father's wool trousers cut down to fit her smaller frame, and a flannel shirt beneath her coat, hardly the outfit she would have chosen for meeting a tribal chief, but necessity had dictated practicality over propriety. The chief's lodge was larger than the surrounding dwellings, with elaborately painted designs adorning its entrance. 2 older warriors stood guard outside, their faces impassive as Black Fox announced their arrival. After a brief exchange, they were ushered inside. The interior was dimly lit by a central fire pit, the smoke rising through an opening in the roof. Hides and woven mats covered the earthen floor, while various weapons, ceremonial items, and practical tools hung from the supporting framework. At the far side of the lodge sat a man whose bearing immediately identified him as Chief Kintpuash. Even before Takelma knelt respectfully before him, the chief was perhaps in his 50s, with streaks of grey in his long black hair and deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. He wore a fringed buckskin shirt adorned with intricate beadwork and a necklace of bear claws that Rebecca assumed signified his status. What struck her most, however, was the clear family resemblance between father and son, the same proud nose, high cheekbones, and penetrating gaze, though the chief's eyes held a weariness that Takelma's lacked. For a long moment, Kintwash simply looked at his son, his stoic expression betraying nothing of his emotions. Then he rose and embraced Takelma briefly but fiercely, speaking words in Modoc that needed no translation, a father's joy at his son's return. When they separated, the chief's attention turned to Rebecca. She fought the urge to fidget under his evaluating gaze, instead meeting his eyes with what she hoped was appropriate respect rather than challenge. Takelma spoke at length, presumably recounting how Rebecca had found him, treated his wound, and shared her limited supplies through the winter. As he spoke, Kintwash's expression shifted subtly from neutral assessment to something more complex, a mixture of gratitude and wariness that reflected the complicated relationship between their peoples. When Takelma finished, the chief spoke directly to Rebecca in heavily accented but clear English. "My son says you saved his life when many of your kind would have let him die or turned him over to the soldiers." "I couldn't leave anyone to die in that storm," Rebecca replied simply. "White or Indian?" The chief studied her face as if searching for deception, then nodded slightly. "Such compassion is rare in these troubled times." He gestured around the lodge. "You are welcome in my camp as a friend of Modoc. No harm will come to you here." Rebecca bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Chief Kintwash." "My people call me Captain Jack," he said, using the name given to him by white settlers years earlier. "You may do the same." The small concession, allowing her to use the name that would be more comfortable for her, seemed designed to put her at ease, and Rebecca appreciated the gesture. The chief spoke again to Takelma in their language, then turned back to Rebecca. "You must be tired from your journey. My son will show you where you can rest. Tonight we will celebrate his return." With that clear dismissal, Takelma led Rebecca from the lodge into the fading afternoon light. The crowd that had gathered earlier had dispersed somewhat, though many Modoc still watched them with unconcealed curiosity. "Come," Takelma said, guiding her toward a smaller wickiup near the chief's lodge. "My Aunt Morning Sky has prepared a place for you. She is a widow and has agreed to share her dwelling." As they approached, an older woman emerged from the structure. She was perhaps in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair in 2 long braids, and a face mapped with the lines of a life lived mostly outdoors. Her expression was neither welcoming nor hostile as she evaluated Rebecca, merely assessing, as one might study an unusual but not necessarily threatening natural phenomenon. Takelma introduced them, speaking in Modoc to his aunt, and then in English to Rebecca. "Morning Sky is my mother's sister. She is respected for her wisdom and healing knowledge. You will be safe with her." Morning Sky spoke directly to Rebecca in halting but understandable English. "You saved my sister's son. For this you have my gratitude." She gestured toward the dwelling. "Come, rest now." The interior of the wickiup was neat and surprisingly comfortable. The domed structure was covered with tulle mats on the outside, but lined with soft hides on the inside for insulation. The earthen floor was also covered with woven mats, and a small fire pit in the center provided warmth with remarkably little smoke, thanks to the well-designed vent at the top. Morning Sky indicated a sleeping area that had been prepared with clean furs. "You sleep here," she said simply, then added with the hint of a smile, "Better than cabin floor, yes." Rebecca returned the smile, recognizing the attempt at humor. "Much better, thank you." Left alone to rest, Rebecca found her mind too full of new impressions to immediately sleep. The Modoc camp was nothing like she had imagined, based on stories and newspaper accounts. Rather than the haphazard primitive settlement she had unconsciously expected, she found a well-organized community with evident social structures, craftsmanship, and purposeful design suited to their environment and way of life. The more she observed, the more she recognized her own ignorance about these people who had occupied this land for countless generations. What else had she misunderstood or never bothered to learn? She must have eventually dozed off because she awakened to morning sky, gently shaking her shoulder. "Come," the older woman said. "Celebration begins." Rebecca followed her outside to discover the camp transformed by the evening's festivities. Large fires burned in a central area, illuminating a cleared space where members of the tribe had gathered. The delicious aroma of roasting meat filled the air, along with the scent of unfamiliar herbs and plants being added to various cooking vessels. Morning sky led Rebecca to a place of honor near Chief Kinpuash, where Takelma was already seated. He wore ceremonial attire now, a beautifully crafted buckskin shirt with elaborate beadwork and porcupine quillwork, leggings with fringe that moved with his slightest motion, and a singular feather tied into his hair. The transformation was striking. In her cabin, wearing borrowed or makeshift clothing, Takelma had seemed somewhat removed from his cultural identity, a man between worlds. Here, surrounded by his people and dressed in traditional garments, he embodied his role as the chief's son, his bearing both proud and completely natural. As Rebecca took her place, she became acutely aware of being the only white person in a gathering of over 100 Modoc. Some still regarded her with suspicion, but others nodded respectfully, apparently having heard the story of how she had saved their future chief's life. The celebration began with Chief Kinpuash, addressing the assembled tribe in their language, frequently gesturing toward Takelma and occasionally toward Rebecca. Though she couldn't understand the words, the message seemed clear. He was explaining his son's disappearance, presumed death, and miraculous return. When he finished speaking, food was distributed. Venison, fish, roots, and berries prepared in ways unfamiliar to Rebecca, but delicious nonetheless. She ate carefully, observing how others handled each dish and following their example. As the meal progressed, Takelma leaned closer to explain aspects of the celebration. "After we eat, there will be dancing," he told her. "Special dances to give thanks for safe returns and healing." "Will you dance?" she asked. He nodded. "I must. It honors those who searched for me and those who prayed for my return." The dances began as twilight deepened into full darkness. Drummers established complex rhythms that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. Singers raised voices in songs that rose and fell like the wind through pine boughs. Dancers moved into the firelit circle, their movements sometimes mimicking animals, sometimes telling stories through gesture and expression. Rebecca watched, mesmerized by the power and beauty of the performances. This, too, contradicted the crude war dances depicted in illustrations she had seen. These dances were clearly sophisticated artistic expressions with specific meanings and purposes, requiring skill and training to execute properly. When Takelma rose to join a particular dance, she held her breath, watching as he moved with surprising grace for a man who had been seriously wounded just months earlier. His movements told a story she could almost understand, of injury, darkness, healing, and return. When he finished, many in the tribe called out what sounded like approving or congratulatory phrases. As he returned to his place beside her, Rebecca whispered, "That was beautiful." Before he could respond, an older man across the fire spoke loudly in Modoc, gesturing toward Rebecca with what seemed like a challenge in his voice. The festive atmosphere tensed slightly as others turned to look at them. "What did he say?" Rebecca asked quietly. Takelma's jaw tightened. "He asks why a white woman is honored at our celebration when white soldiers hunt our people. What will you answer?" "I won't," Takelma replied. "My father will." Sure enough, Chief Kinpuash responded to the challenge with measured words that, even without understanding the language, Rebecca could convey authority and wisdom. When he finished, the older man looked dissatisfied but offered no further comment. He reminded them that we judge each person by their actions, not their race. Takelma explained, that you acted with honor when others might not have, and that such behavior deserves recognition. Rebecca felt a complex mixture of gratitude for the chief's defense and discomfort at being the cause of discord during what should have been a purely joyful celebration. As the evening progressed, more dances were performed, stories told, and songs sung. Children eventually fell asleep in their parents' laps, while elders reminisced about celebrations from years past. Despite her outsider status, Rebecca found herself drawn into the community experience, occasionally catching herself swaying to the drum beats or smiling at particularly skilled dancers. Near the end of the celebration, morning sky approached, with an elderly woman whose deeply lined face and pure white hair spoke of great age. The older woman carried something wrapped in a soft hide. "This is Singing Bird," Morning Sky introduced. "Oldest woman in our tribe. She has gift for you." Singing Bird unwrapped the bundle to reveal a beautifully crafted necklace, a leather cord strung with small carved beads, polished stones, and a central pendant made from an unusual blue-green stone. "She says you have a strong spirit," Morning Sky translated as the elderly woman spoke. "Woman who saves an enemy has rare courage. This medicine pendant will protect you in difficult times ahead." Rebecca accepted the gift with appropriate reverence, deeply touched by the unexpected gesture from someone who had every historical reason to despise her kind. "Thank you," she said, meeting Singing Bird's faded eyes. "I will treasure it." As the celebration finally wound down and people began returning to their dwellings, Takelma walked Rebecca back to Morning Sky's wickiup. "You did well tonight," he said quietly. "My people are beginning to see what I have seen, that you are different from those they have learned to fear." "I'm not sure I deserve such distinction," Rebecca replied honestly. "I only did what seemed right, which is rarer than you might think," Takelma observed. He paused outside the dwelling. "Rest well. Tomorrow there is much to discuss about the days ahead." As Rebecca settled onto her sleeping furs in the quiet darkness of Morning Sky's wickiup, she reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken, from isolated survival in her father's cabin to honored guest in a Modoc celebration, all because of a single decision made during a snowstorm. What she didn't yet realize was that the most consequential development still lay ahead, and that her life would never truly be her own again. Dawn broke over the Modoc camp with ethereal beauty, pink and gold light filtering through morning mist that rose from the lake like spirits ascending. Rebecca stood at the entrance of Morning Sky's wickiup, watching as the camp gradually stirred to life. Women rekindled cooking fires, children emerged yawning from family dwellings, and men gathered in small groups, their low voices carrying serious tones that belied the peaceful scene. After a week in the Modoc camp, Rebecca had begun to find her place within its rhythms. Morning Sky had taken her under her wing, teaching her tribal ways of preparing food, showing her which plants were harvested for medicine, and patiently correcting her when she unwittingly violated some cultural norm. Other women in the tribe, while initially distant, had gradually begun to include her in daily activities, grinding acorn flour, weaving baskets, tanning hides. The children had been quickest to accept her, their natural curiosity overcoming any inherited wariness. They delighted in teaching her Modoc words, dissolving into peals of laughter at her mispronunciations, then solemnly correcting her until she improved. But despite these positive interactions, Rebecca remained acutely aware of her outsider status. Some tribal members, particularly older warriors, watched her with undisguised suspicion. Conversations would halt when she approached, resuming only when she had passed. And even those who treated her with courtesy maintained a certain reserve, as if acknowledging her presence while holding some essential part of themselves apart. Takelma had been less present than she had expected, As the chief's son, his return had thrust him immediately back into tribal responsibilities, hunting parties, councils, training younger warriors. When their paths did cross, he greeted her warmly, but with a formality that hadn't existed in her cabin, where survival had made them equals in a shared struggle. This morning, however, was different. As Rebecca watched the camp awaken, she saw Takelma approaching with purposeful strides, his expression grave. "Walk with me," he said without preamble. "We must speak privately." Concerned by his tone, Rebecca followed as he led her away from the camp toward a small rise overlooking the lake. The location offered both privacy and a clear view of anyone who might approach, she realized. A tactical choice rather than a scenic one. "What's wrong?" she asked when they reached the vantage point. Takelma scanned the surrounding area before answering. "Scouts returned late last night. A cavalry detachment is moving through the territory, closer than they've ventured before." His jaw tightened. "They've burned 2 seasonal camps already. Empty camps, I hope." Rebecca's chest constricted at the thought of women and children fleeing before soldiers. "Yes, fortunately. Our people had already moved to spring gathering grounds." His expression darkened. "But they left messages carved into trees, threats that they would return, that all Modoc must surrender and relocate to the reservation immediately." Rebecca absorbed this information, understanding both the immediate danger and the deeper implications. "What will your father do?" "The council meets this morning to decide." Takelma turned to face her directly. "But that is not why I brought you here. There is another matter we must discuss." Something in his tone sent a shiver of apprehension through Rebecca. "What matter?" "Your cabin was burned 3 days ago. Scouts found it destroyed, with cavalry tracks surrounding it." The news hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Though she had left the cabin expecting to return eventually, she had never considered it might be deliberately destroyed. That modest structure had represented everything she and her father had worked for. Their dreams of a new life in the Oregon Territory, the last physical connection to his memory. "Everything is gone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Takelma nodded, genuine regret in his eyes. "The walls still stand partially, but the roof collapsed and all contents were destroyed. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I know what that place meant to you." Rebecca struggled to process the implications. Without the cabin, her options narrowed dramatically. She couldn't simply return to her homestead and rebuild. Not alone, not with winter just ended, and certainly not with hostile military forces in the area. Why would they burn it? She wondered aloud. It posed no threat. They found evidence of my presence there, Takelma explained grimly. The scouts overheard soldiers talking. They discovered the bandages you used for my wound, the extra bowl and utensils. They concluded the cabin had harbored hostiles and destroyed it as punishment. The injustice of it sparked anger through Rebecca's shock. Punishment for an act of basic human compassion. To them, helping any Modoc is treason, Takelma replied simply. The political situation has deteriorated while we were isolated by winter. The territorial governor has declared all Modoc who refuse reservation placement to be hostile enemies. Rebecca sat heavily on a fallen log, the full weight of her situation settling upon her. Her home was gone. Her few possessions were ashes. And she had apparently been branded a traitor to her own race for saving a wounded man. What does this mean for me? She asked finally, meeting Takelma's concerned gaze. He sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. It means you cannot safely return to white settlements in this territory. If soldiers discovered your connection to me, to us, you would face serious consequences. He hesitated. It also means you cannot safely remain with us much longer. I don't understand. If I can't go back to white society and I can't stay here, where am I supposed to go? That is what we must decide, and quickly. Takelma's voice held a new urgency. "The cavalry unit that burned your cabin is reportedly tracking Modoc movements. If they find our camp while you are here, the situation would be volatile for everyone. So, I'm a danger to your people now." The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. "Because I saved your life." "Not to me," Takelma assured her quietly. "But there are factions within the tribe. Some warriors, young men eager to prove themselves, see any white presence as a threat. Others fear you might be used as a bargaining chip by the army if they capture you here." "And what does your father think?" Rebecca asked, guessing the chief's opinion would ultimately carry the most weight. "He has called a special council for mid-morning. He wishes you to attend." Takelma stood, offering his hand. To help her rise. "We should return. There is much to prepare before then." The council gathered in a large earthen lodge used for tribal meetings and ceremonies. Rebecca entered with morning sky, acutely conscious of the eyes tracking her movement. Unlike the celebration that had welcomed Takelma home, this gathering held palpable tension. Warriors sat in groups, some wearing paint that suggested readiness for conflict. Tribal elders occupied places of honor near the chief, their weathered faces solemn. Chief Kintpuash nodded acknowledgement as Rebecca took the place indicated for her, slightly apart from the main tribal groupings, but still within the circle, a physical representation of her ambiguous status, neither fully accepted nor entirely outcast. Takelma sat at his father's right hand, his face composed in the impassive expression he wore for official functions. Rebecca had learned to recognize this as his chief's son demeanor, distinct from the more open countenance he showed in private conversations. The council began with ritual observances, prayers in the Modoc language, the passing of a ceremonial, pipe, acknowledgments of tribal ancestors. Then Chief Kintpuash spoke at length, his words translated in whispers to Rebecca by morning sky. He recounted the recent developments, the cavalry movements, the destroyed camps, the increasing pressure from the territorial government. "He says the time for peaceful resistance may be ending," Morning Sky murmured. "Many young warriors push for fight, not words." An older warrior rose to speak next, his scarred face and deliberate gestures commanding attention. His speech elicited murmurs of agreement from many present. "Grey Wolf says we should move camp immediately," Morning Sky translated. "Go to lava beds where cavalry horses cannot follow easily. Establish defensive position." Others spoke in turn, some counseling continued attempts at negotiation, others advocating for more aggressive responses to military incursions. Throughout, Rebecca noticed occasional glances in her direction, some curious, others hostile. Finally, the chief turned the council's attention directly to her situation. Speaking in his limited English for her benefit, he addressed the gathering. "The woman Rebecca saved my son's life when others of her kind would have let him die. For this, she has lost her home and cannot return to her people safely." He gestured toward her. "We must decide what is to be done." An immediate debate erupted, with multiple voices offering opinions in rapid Modoc that overwhelmed Morning Sky's ability to translate. Rebecca could only watch the animated exchanges, catching occasional phrases in English when speakers shifted languages to make particular points. White woman, danger to camp, debt of honor, cannot be ignored, could betray location, not her fault soldiers burned. The debate intensified until the chief raised his hand for silence. When the lodge had quieted, he looked toward Takelma, speaking words that caused a ripple of reaction through the assembled tribe. Morning Sky's hand closed around Rebecca's arm in surprise. "Chief asks Takelma what he proposes for your future," she whispered. "This is a great honor, allowing my son to decide such matter." All eyes turned to Takelma as he rose to address the council. His voice carried clearly through the lodge, his words measured and deliberate, As he spoke, Rebecca watched the faces of those listening, saw eyebrows raise in surprise, noted the exchanged glances between tribal members, caught the slow nods of approval from some elders, and the frowns of disagreement from others. "What is he saying?" she whispered to Morning Sky, when the older woman remained silent, apparently too engrossed in Takelma's words to translate. Before Morning Sky could respond, Takelma switched to English, clearly intending the latter portion of his statement to be understood directly by Rebecca. "Which is why I propose a formal alliance through marriage," he was saying, his gaze now fixed on Rebecca's shocked face. "Such a union would honor the life debt our tribe owes her, provide her with protection under tribal law, and create a bond that would benefit both her and our people in the difficult times ahead." A stunned silence fell over the lodge as his words registered. Rebecca felt as though the ground had suddenly shifted beneath her, leaving her unbalanced and struggling to comprehend what she had just heard. Had Takelma, the son of Chief Kintpuash, just proposed marriage to her before his entire tribe? Chief Kintpuash's response broke the silence. Still speaking English, he addressed Rebecca directly. "My son offers a solution with wisdom beyond his years," he said, his weathered face unreadable. "A marriage between you would resolve many difficulties at once. You would gain the full protection of our tribe. We would honor our debt to you in the highest possible manner, and any children of such a union would create lasting bonds between our peoples when such connections may be needed most." Rebecca struggled to find her voice, overwhelmed by the unexpected proposal and its public nature. I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "You need not answer immediately," the chief continued. "This is a serious matter deserving reflection. But know that time is short. The council must make decisions today about moving our camp to safer grounds. Your status must be resolved before we depart." With that he rose, signaling an end to the formal council. As tribal members began to disperse, many cast curious or speculative glances toward Rebecca, who remained frozen in place, trying to process the monumental choice suddenly thrust upon her. Morning Sky touched her arm gently. "Come, we will speak privately." In the relative seclusion of Morning Sky's wickiup, Rebecca paced the small, circular space, her mind racing. "Did you know this was coming?" she asked the older woman, who was calmly preparing a tea from herbs that filled the dwelling with a soothing aroma. "I suspected," Morning Sky admitted. "Takelma spoke with me 2 days ago about traditional marriage customs. I thought perhaps he considered this path, but it's—" Rebecca struggled to articulate the jumble of emotions the proposal had triggered. "It's so unexpected. We barely know each other." Morning Sky looked up from her preparation with an expression of gentle amusement. "You lived together alone through winter, shared food, shelter, danger. You know each other better than many who marry." Put that way, it was difficult to argue. The intense circumstances of their winter isolation had indeed created a bond that transcended conventional acquaintance. Rebecca had seen Takelma at his most vulnerable, had trusted him with her safety, had shared the intimate details of her life story during long evenings by the fire. "But marriage," she persisted, "that's a lifetime commitment in my culture." "In ours as well," Morning Sky confirmed, "though understood differently perhaps. Marriage is practical alliance first, emotional." "1 second," she handed Rebecca a cup of the fragrant tea. "Drink, it helps clear thoughts." Rebecca accepted the tea, sipping it slowly as she continued to process the situation. "What happens if I refuse?" Morning Sky's expression grew more serious. "Council will need another solution for your safety. Perhaps escort you to a distant settlement where soldiers do not hunt Modoc. Perhaps send you with traders to California territory." She paused. "But the journey would be dangerous. Our protection is limited once you leave tribal lands." The alternatives sounded both risky and lonely. Starting over alone in an unfamiliar place, far from everything and everyone she had come to know. Even if she reached safety, what future awaited a single woman with no resources, no family connections, and potentially a reputation as someone who had aided hostile natives? "And if I accept?" Rebecca asked quietly. "You become a Modoc woman," Morning Sky stated simply. "Wife of future chief, respected position, many responsibilities." She studied Rebecca's face. "Not an easy life. Our people face difficult times. But you would have a place, purpose, protection." A soft sound at the wiki-up entrance interrupted their conversation. Takelma stood there, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "May I speak with Rebecca alone?" he asked his aunt. Morning Sky nodded, rising with the fluid grace that belied her age. "I will gather more herbs," she said, tactfully providing an excuse to give them privacy. When she had gone, an awkward silence fell between Rebecca and Takelma. He remained near the entrance, as if unsure of his welcome after the bombshell he had dropped in the council. "I owe you an apology," he finally said. "I should have spoken to you privately before raising this matter in council." "Yes, you should." "Have," Rebecca agreed, her voice steadier than she felt. "That was quite a surprise to spring on someone in front of an entire tribe." Takelma inclined his head, accepting the rebuke. "The scouts' news about your cabin changed circumstances rapidly. I made a tactical decision rather than a personal one." His eyes met hers directly. "But this is both tactical and personal." "Explain what you mean," Rebecca requested, needing to understand his motivations fully before she could even begin to consider his proposal. Takelma moved further into the wiki-up, taking a seat across from her with the small fire between them. "From a tactical perspective, our marriage solves several problems at once. It provides you with clear status and protection within the tribe. It honors the life debt we owe you in a way that satisfies tribal custom. It creates a legitimate reason for your presence among us that even the most suspicious warriors cannot challenge." He poked at the fire with a small stick, organizing his thoughts. "From a personal perspective," he hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "I respect you, Rebecca, your courage, your intelligence, your willingness to learn our ways. I believe we could build a good life together, even in these difficult times." "Is that enough for marriage in your view?" Rebecca asked. "Respect and practicality?" "It is a better foundation than many marriages begin with," he replied with characteristic directness. "Passion fades. Respect endures." Rebecca considered his words, recognizing their wisdom despite her cultural conditioning that prioritized romantic love as the basis for marriage. Her own parents had married for love, but she had seen many frontier marriages based primarily on mutual need and practical compatibility. "What would this marriage mean in practical terms?" she asked. "Where would we live? What would be expected of me?" "For now, we would live with the tribe, moving as necessary to avoid conflict with the army," Takelma explained. "You would continue learning our ways, but would also be valued for the knowledge you bring from your world. As the wife of the chief's son, you would have status and responsibilities, helping settle disputes among women, participating in ceremonies, eventually helping guide the tribe's interactions with white settlers when peaceful solutions are found." He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "I would not ask you to abandon your identity, Rebecca. You would become Modoc, yes, but you would still be yourself. I value the perspective you bring from walking in both worlds." The sincerity in his voice touched something in Rebecca. Whatever his other motivations, she believed he genuinely respected her and saw value in who she was. "And if I refuse?" she asked, echoing her earlier question to Morning Sky. "Then I will personally ensure you reach safety in a settlement far from this conflict," he promised, "but I cannot guarantee what life would await you there." Rebecca rose, needing physical movement to process the swirling thoughts and emotions. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is overwhelming." Takelma stood as well, maintaining a respectful distance. "I understand, but as my father said, time is short. The council has decided to move camp to the lava beds tomorrow. At dawn, your decision must be made before we depart." He moved toward the entrance, then paused. "One more thing you should consider," he said, his voice softening. "I believe we could find happiness together, Rebecca. Not just survival or convenience, but genuine contentment. I have seen how quickly you adapt, how deeply you observe, how thoroughly you commit to what you believe is right. These qualities would serve you well as a Modoc woman and as my wife." With that, he departed, leaving Rebecca alone with the monumental decision before her. As afternoon waned toward evening, Rebecca sought solitude by the lake shore, watching ripples spread across the water's surface as she turned over every aspect of her situation. The camp behind her hummed with activity, preparations for tomorrow's departure, creating an atmosphere of controlled urgency. She clutched the blue-green stone pendant Singing Bird had given her, drawing comfort from its smooth surface as she weighed her limited options. Return to white society and face potential persecution for aiding the Modoc. Travel to some distant settlement and start over alone with nothing. Or accept Takelma's proposal and embrace a life utterly different from anything she had ever imagined. For herself, the sun was setting, painting the lake in crimson and gold when she heard footsteps approaching. Turning, she found not Takelma as she had expected, but Chief Kintpuash himself. "May I join you?" he asked in his accented English. Rebecca nodded, honored and somewhat intimidated by his presence. The chief rarely spoke to her directly, their interactions usually mediated by Takelma or Morning Sky. He lowered himself beside her with the careful movements of a man who had lived hard years on the land. For several minutes he simply sat in silence, watching the sunset with her. "My son is a good man," he said finally. "Strong, honest, loyal to our people." "I know," Rebecca acknowledged quietly. The chief nodded, satisfied with her response. "He sees far like an eagle, understanding the world is changing. Modoc must find a new path or perish." He glanced at her. "You could help him find this path." "I'm not sure I have that wisdom," Rebecca admitted. "Not wisdom," Kintpuash corrected. "Different eyes. You see what we cannot. He sees what your people cannot. Together, powerful vision." The perspective struck Rebecca forcefully. Perhaps this was the true value Takelma saw in their potential union. Not just a solution to immediate problems, but a partnership that could help navigate the challenging future facing the Modoc people. "I must ask you something important," the chief continued, his weathered face serious. "If you become Takelma's wife, will you stand with Modoc people even against your own kind?" The direct question cut to the heart of Rebecca's dilemma. Marriage to Takelma meant choosing sides in a conflict she had never intended to join. It meant potentially being viewed as a traitor by the society she had been raised in. It meant committing to people still largely foreign to her, despite the connections she had begun to form. "I don't know if I can answer that absolutely," she replied honestly. "But I can promise this. I will always stand for what I believe is right and just, regardless of which side that places me on." Kintpuash studied her face intently, as if reading truths beyond her words. Then, apparently satisfied, he nodded once. "Honest answer," he said approvingly. "Better than a false promise." He rose to his feet. "You have until dawn to decide. Choose, with both heart and mind." As darkness fell completely over the camp, Rebecca remained by the lake, watching stars emerge in the vast sky overhead. Her father had taught her the constellations during their journey west, explaining how travelers had used them for guidance since ancient times. "When you're lost, look up," he had said. The stars never change their patterns. They'll always show you the way home. But where was home now? Her cabin was ashes. Her life in Illinois was impossibly distant. The future she and her father had planned no longer existed. Perhaps home wasn't a place at all, she reflected. Perhaps it was where you found purpose, connection, and the freedom to be your truest self. By that measure, her choice began to crystallize with unexpected clarity. As a new moon rose over the lake, Rebecca Caldwell made her decision, one that would alter not only her own destiny, but potentially the fate of the Modoc people in the turbulent years ahead. The lava beds of Northern California presented a stark, alien landscape unlike anything Rebecca had ever encountered. Twisted formations of black volcanic rock created a natural fortress of caves, tunnels, and elevated positions practically designed for defense. Steam rose from scattered vents, where underground heat met surface moisture, shrouding portions of the terrain in an ethereal mist that further complicated navigation for anyone unfamiliar with the area. For the Modoc, this forbidding environment represented safety. Cavalry horses couldn't easily traverse the sharp, uneven terrain. The numerous caves provided natural shelter from both elements and enemy fire. Hidden water sources known only to tribal members ensured survival during extended occupation. Most importantly, the maze-like configuration offered countless defensive positions and escape routes that only those intimately familiar with the landscape could effectively utilize. Rebecca stood at the entrance of one such cave, watching as tribal members efficiently established their temporary settlement within the lava bed's protective embrace. The decision to relocate had set the entire camp in motion before dawn, with every member, from the eldest to the youngest, playing assigned roles in the carefully orchestrated movement. Our people have used these strongholds for generations, Morning Sky explained as she joined Rebecca. When enemies threaten, we come to the stone fortress. Rebecca nodded, trying to imagine how the harsh terrain must appear to military scouts accustomed to conventional battlefields. It's certainly defensible, she observed. More than white soldiers understand, the older woman agreed with grim satisfaction. They will learn if they follow us here. The implied warning in her tone reminded Rebecca of the reality behind their relocation. This wasn't merely a seasonal movement or precautionary measure. The Modoc were actively preparing for potential armed conflict with U.S. cavalry forces. Takelma seeks you, Morning Sky added, gesturing toward a larger cave where the tribal council had gathered to complete arrangements for their new camp. Time for your answer has come. Rebecca's heart quickened, though not with uncertainty. Her night of reflection by the lake had brought surprising clarity. What remained was the formalization of her decision and its consequences, both immediate and far-reaching. "Thank you," she said, touching Morning Sky's arm with genuine affection. In the weeks since her arrival at the Modoc camp, the older woman had become something of a mentor, patiently guiding Rebecca through cultural differences and offering wisdom without judgment. "You have chosen?" Morning Sky asked, her perceptive eyes studying Rebecca's face. "Yes," Rebecca confirmed simply. The older woman nodded, seemingly satisfied with what she read in Rebecca's expression. "Good. Decision made is better than decision feared." With those words of practical philosophy, Morning Sky left to continue her work establishing their new living quarters, leaving Rebecca to make her way to the council cave alone. The natural chamber was larger than it appeared from outside, its ceiling high enough for tall men to stand comfortably, its walls smoothed by ancient lava flows. A fire burned at the center, the smoke finding natural vents in the rock overhead. Chief Kinpwash sat with his advisers on one side, while Takelma stood as Rebecca entered, his eyes immediately seeking hers with uncharacteristic vulnerability. She had seen many facets of this complex man over the months since he had collapsed bleeding at her cabin door. The wounded warrior fighting for survival, the patient learner sharing knowledge, the dedicated son reunited with his people, the tribal leader weighing difficult decisions. But this unguarded expression, revealing how much her answer truly mattered to him personally, touched her more deeply than any words could have. The chief gestured for her to approach. The small council fell silent, all eyes turning to the white woman who had become such a pivotal figure in their recent tribal history. Rebecca Caldwell, Chief Kinpwash addressed her formally. "You have considered my son's proposal of marriage. Have you reached your decision?" Rebecca straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly, wanting no misunderstanding of her carefully considered choice. "I have," she replied. "I accept Takelma's proposal with gratitude for the honor it represents and full awareness of the responsibilities it entails." A ripple of reaction passed through the assembled council members, nods of approval from some, thoughtful consideration from others. Takelma's expression transformed, relief and genuine joy briefly overcoming his usual reserve before he composed himself again. "You understand what this means?" the chief asked, his weathered face serious. "You become a Modoc woman, follow Modoc ways, stand with Modoc people." "I understand," Rebecca confirmed. "My decision is made with both heart and mind, as you advised." Chief Kinpwash studied her for a long moment, then nodded with apparent satisfaction. "It is decided, then. The ceremony will take place at sunset." He turned to an elderly advisor. "Grandfather White Fox, prepare the marriage rituals." The white-haired elder nodded, eyeing Rebecca with a combination of curiosity and cautious approval. "The spirits must be properly honored for such an unusual union. I will make preparations." With that, the council dispersed to continue organizing the camp's establishment, leaving Rebecca and Takelma momentarily alone beside the council fire. "You're certain?" he asked quietly, giving her one final opportunity to reconsider. Rebecca met his gaze directly. "Yes, this feels right in ways I can't fully explain." She smiled slightly. "Besides, I've never been one to choose the expected path." The corner of Takelma's mouth lifted in response, the subtle smile she had come to recognize as genuine. "That much has been clear since you dragged a half-dead enemy warrior into your cabin rather than letting him freeze." "One of my better impulsive decisions, it seems," she replied, allowing herself a moment of lightness before addressing the weightier aspects of their situation. "What happens now? What should I expect from this ceremony?" "Morning Sky will prepare you," Takelma explained. "There are traditional garments, ceremonial purification, teachings only women can share." He glanced toward the cave entrance, where afternoon light indicated the ceremony wasn't far off. "I must prepare as well. The son of a chief has specific obligations to fulfill." "And after the ceremony?" Rebecca asked, needing to understand what would immediately follow. "We will be given a dwelling of our own," Takelma replied, understanding her practical concerns. "A private cave has been prepared. As my wife, you'll have duties within the tribe, but those will be gradually assumed as you learn our ways more fully." Rebecca appreciated his matter-of-fact approach, addressing the practical realities rather than cloaking the arrangement in romantic ideals that might not withstand their complicated circumstances. "I should find Morning Sky, then," she said, suddenly conscious of how little time remained before sunset. Takelma nodded, then surprised her by taking her hand, a rarely exhibited gesture of physical affection. "Thank you," he said simply, the words conveying deeper meaning than more elaborate expressions might have achieved. Rebecca squeezed his hand before releasing it. "We'll face whatever comes together," she replied. the promise encompassing far more than just their impending marriage. The preparation for a Modoc marriage ceremony proved more elaborate than Rebecca had anticipated. In a secluded cave set aside for women's rituals, Morning Sky and several other tribal women, including elderly Singing Bird and, surprisingly, two younger women who had previously kept their distance, engaged in what was clearly a long-established process of preparing a bride. Rebecca was first led to a natural spring within the lava beds, where she underwent a ritual cleansing. The water was startlingly cold, fed by mountain snowmelt, but the ceremonial significance overrode physical discomfort. Morning Sky chanted in Modoc as Rebecca immersed herself, explaining that the water carried away her past life and prepared her spirit for the new one she was entering. After the cleansing, Rebecca was dried and dressed in garments created specifically for the ceremony. A dress of soft deerskin had been hastily but beautifully crafted, adorned with beadwork and porcupine quills, in patterns she now recognized as signifying important tribal values: strength, wisdom, fertility, and protection. Her hair was brushed until it shone, then partially braided and adorned with small feathers and carved bone beads. Throughout the preparations, the women shared traditional teachings about marriage in Modoc culture, practical advice about living, arrangements, ceremonial responsibilities, and expected behaviors, interspersed with folk wisdom about maintaining harmony and raising children that transcended cultural differences. What struck Rebecca most was the matter-of-fact acceptance she now encountered from women who had previously been standoffish. It seemed that her decision to join the tribe through marriage had transformed her status from suspicious outsider to sister in becoming. "You are a brave woman," one of the younger women, Willow, commented as she worked on Rebecca's hair. "To choose our hard path when you could return to white comforts." "There would be no comfort in returning," Rebecca replied honestly. "My home is destroyed, and I would likely face persecution for helping Takelma." Willow nodded thoughtfully. "Still, many white women fear us, think us savages." She met Rebecca's eyes in the polished metal mirror. "You see differently." "I've learned to look beyond what I was taught," Rebecca acknowledged, "to judge people by their actions and character rather than the color of their skin or the customs they follow." "Good wisdom for the chief's wife," Singing Bird commented in her limited English, nodding approval from where she supervised the preparations. As sunset approached, Morning Sky explained the final elements of the ceremony. "Chief will ask 3 times if you accept Takelma as husband. Each time, answer with an increasingly strong voice. Shows growing commitment." She demonstrated the proper progression from soft acceptance to confident assertion. "Takelma will present gifts to you. Knife, blanket, special necklace. Accept each with both hands. Show respect for the maker's skill." She showed Rebecca the proper gestures of acceptance. "You will present gift to him also. We have prepared this." She revealed a beautifully crafted leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork, depicting 2 wolves traveling side by side. Contains sacred herbs for protection in battle, small carved stone for strength, traditional gift from wife to warrior husband. Rebecca accepted the pouch with genuine appreciation for the women's effort in creating it, especially on such short notice. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the symbolism meaningful. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Thank you for helping me honor your traditions properly." "You learn quickly," Morning Sky observed with satisfaction. "Good quality for the chief's wife." She straightened Rebecca's dress one final time. "It is time." The ceremony took place on a flat expanse of lava rock that formed a natural platform overlooking the rugged landscape. The entire tribe had gathered to witness the unprecedented union, their faces illuminated by the golden light of the setting sun and the glow of ceremonial fires. Rebecca was led to the ceremonial space by the women who had prepared her, while Takelma waited with his father and the tribal elders. He too had been transformed by ceremonial preparation. Dressed in elaborately beaded buckskins, his hair adorned with eagle feathers signifying his status, his face bearing subtle paint markings that highlighted his strong features. Chief Kintpuash presided over the ceremony, his commanding presence drawing all attention as he began the traditional words in Modoc, then repeated them in English for Rebecca's benefit. "We gather as Modoc people have gathered for countless generations to witness the joining of man and woman in the sacred bond of marriage," he intoned. "But today we also witness something our ancestors could not have foreseen, the joining of Modoc and white blood, the bridging of worlds long separated." He gestured to Takelma and Rebecca to step forward, positioning them facing each other with the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. "Takelma, son of Kintpuash, grandson of Running Bear, do you take this woman as your wife, to honor according to Modoc tradition, to protect with your strength, to counsel with your wisdom, to provide with your skills, to father her children, and to walk beside her on life's path until death separates your spirits?" "I do so pledge," Takelma responded, his voice carrying clearly to all assembled. The chief turned to Rebecca. "Rebecca Caldwell, daughter of Edward, do you take this man as your husband, to honor according to Modoc tradition, to support with your strength, to counsel with your wisdom, to nurture with your skills, to bear his children, and to walk beside him on life's path until death separates your spirits?" As instructed, Rebecca answered the first, asking softly, "I pledge." The chief repeated the question, and Rebecca responded with firmer conviction. On the third asking, her voice rang out with confident certainty, prompting approving nods from the tribal elders. Takelma then presented his gifts, first a beautifully crafted knife in a beaded sheath, symbolizing his pledge to provide for and protect her. Next, a finely woven blanket created by his female relatives, representing warmth and comfort. And finally, a necklace of polished stones, carved bone, and a single eagle feather, symbolizing her new status as wife of the chief's son. Rebecca accepted each gift with the proper gestures Morning Sky had taught her, expressing appreciation for both the items and their symbolic meaning. Then she presented the beaded pouch, which Takelma received with evident admiration for its craftsmanship and significance. With these exchanges complete, Chief Kintpuash bound their hands together with a woven cord of natural fibers, deer sinew for strength, plant fibers for growth, and rabbit fur for fertility. As these materials are woven together to form something stronger than any alone, so are your lives now joined, he proclaimed. What the spirits have witnessed, let no person tear asunder. The final element of the ceremony surprised Rebecca, though Takelma had clearly anticipated it. A small cut was made on each of their palms, and their bleeding hands were pressed together. "Blood of Modoc, blood of white, now mingled as one," the chief declared. "From this day forward, Rebecca is Modoc woman, entitled to all protections and bound by all obligations of the tribe." As their joined hands were wrapped with a healing herb poultice and bound with a soft leather strip, the tribe erupted in celebratory calls. Drums began to beat, and singers raised their voices in traditional marriage songs. The ceremony transitioned seamlessly into celebration. Food was shared, stories told, dances performed. Despite the circumstances that had necessitated their relocation to the defensible lava beds, the tribe embraced this opportunity for joy amid increasingly troubled times. Throughout the evening, Rebecca found herself the center of attention in ways both expected and surprising. Elders offered wisdom about marriage. Women shared practical advice about adapting to Modoc ways. Warriors pledged their protection to the chief's new daughter. Most striking was how her status had transformed. Virtually overnight, where once there had been suspicion or distance, there was now inclusion. Her decision to join the tribe through marriage had apparently settled questions about her loyalty and place among them. As firelight danced against the ancient volcanic rock and stars emerged in the vast sky overhead, Rebecca and Takelma eventually slipped away from the celebration toward the private cave that had been prepared as their dwelling. Inside, furs created a comfortable sleeping area, while small ceremonial items had been arranged to bless their union. A tiny fire provided warmth and light in the otherwise dark space. Alone for the first time as husband and wife, an awkward silence momentarily fell between them, the public ceremony and celebration having left little opportunity for private. In conversation about what would follow, Takelma was the first to speak, his tone gentle and without presumption. "Marriage among my people is considered fully sealed through physical union," he explained carefully. "But I understand your ways may differ. I would not rush what should develop naturally between us." Rebecca appreciated his sensitivity. Despite the practical aspects of their arrangement, this moment carried emotional significance that transcended cultural differences. "In my culture as well, marriage implies physical union," she acknowledged quietly. "But perhaps we could simply begin by talking, as husband and wife rather than as reluctant patient and caregiver, or as chief son and outsider." Takelma smiled, a full, genuine smile rarely displayed in public settings. "I would welcome that," he agreed, settling beside her near the fire. "Though I'm not entirely sure where the boundary lies between those former roles and our new ones." "Perhaps that's something we'll discover together," Rebecca suggested, feeling some of the tension ease between them. As the sounds of continued celebration filtered distantly into their private sanctuary, they talked far into the night, sharing hopes, concerns, and perspectives about their unusual partnership and the uncertain future facing the Modoc people. Rebecca spoke of her lingering connection to her former life, her guilt about abandoning her father's dreams for their homestead, her fears about adapting fully to Modoc ways. Takelma expressed his determination to find a peaceful solution for his people, his frustration with both intransigent tribal members and unyielding government officials, his hope that their marriage might somehow become a symbol of possible coexistence. "My father believes war is coming," he confided, his expression somber in the firelight. "He has resisted the young warrior's calls for action, but each cavalry incursion, each burned camp, each broken promise from government agents pushes him closer to accepting the inevitable." "And you?" Rebecca asked. "What do you believe?" Takelma was silent for a long moment, considering his response carefully. "I believe that without significant change on both sides, conflict cannot be avoided indefinitely, but I also believe that such a war would ultimately destroy my people, regardless of individual battles won or lost." The honesty of his assessment touched Rebecca deeply. This was no naive peace-seeker ignoring reality, nor a glory-hunting warrior eager for battle. This was a man carrying the weight of his people's future, clear-eyed about the challenges they faced. "Then we must work for that significant change," she said with quiet determination. "From inside and outside both worlds." Takelma reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that felt both novel and natural. "That is why I believe our union matters beyond just our personal circumstances," he said earnestly. "Together, we represent possibility, the chance that different peoples might find common ground. A symbol is powerful only if it inspires action," Rebecca pointed out pragmatically. "True," he acknowledged, which is why we must be more than symbol. We must find practical paths forward, even as forces on both sides push toward conflict. Their conversation continued until exhaustion finally claimed them, and they slept side by side on the fur-lined bed, their physical union postponed by mutual understanding that emotional connection must come first, but their commitment to facing challenges together was already firmly established. As Rebecca drifted towards sleep, the reality of her transformation struck her with full force. In the span of a few months, she had gone from being Edward Caldwell's daughter and hopeful frontier homesteader to Takelma's wife and a newly made Modoc woman. Her entire identity had been restructured by circumstance, choice, and ceremony, yet somehow drifting off beside the man whose life she had saved during a blizzard and who now called her wife. Rebecca felt not loss, but possibility, the sense that while one path had closed, another had opened, leading toward a future she could never have imagined, but now embraced with clear-eyed determination. What neither she nor Takelma could know, as they began their life together, was how soon and how severely their commitment would be tested by the gathering storm of conflict between the Modoc people and the encroaching forces of the United States government. The first military patrol entered the outer edges of the lava beds, exactly 2 weeks after Rebecca and Takelma's marriage ceremony. A Modoc scouting party spotted them, 15 cavalry soldiers with an Indian guide, cautiously navigating the treacherous terrain, clearly searching rather than simply patrolling established routes. The news spread through the Modoc camp with remarkable speed, transforming the atmosphere from guarded routine to focused alertness. Warriors checked weapons and gathered at defensive positions, while women secured children and essential supplies in deeper caves that could serve as emergency shelters. Rebecca was with Morning Sky, learning to prepare a traditional medicine from specific volcanic minerals found only in the lava beds when Takelma found them. "The soldiers have not ventured this deep before," he said without preamble, his expression grave. "My father has called an emergency council. Your presence is requested." The seriousness of his tone told Rebecca everything she needed to know about the severity of the situation. In the 2 weeks since their marriage, she had been gradually assuming duties appropriate to her new status as the wife of the chief's son. Chief Kintwash had included her in some tribal discussions, but had not yet invited her to emergency councils focused on military matters. "They're searching specifically for us, aren't they?" she asked, as they made their way to the council cave, navigating pathways that had become increasingly familiar during her time in the lava beds. "Yes," Takelma confirmed grimly. "The scouts overheard enough to confirm they have orders to locate our stronghold and assess our numbers." He glanced at her. "They also mentioned a white woman reportedly being held captive by the Modoc." Rebecca felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "Me, they think I'm a captive." "It would fit their preferred narrative," Takelma agreed. "A helpless white woman taken by savages provides convenient justification for military action." "But I chose to be here," Rebecca protested. "I'm your wife, not a prisoner." A distinction they would likely find irrelevant or even more provocative, Takelma pointed out. "A white woman willingly marrying a Modoc challenges their view of the natural order." They reached the council cave, where Chief Kintwash and key tribal leaders had already gathered. The discussion was already underway, conducted primarily in Modoc, though with occasional English phrases for Rebecca's benefit. Black Fox, the scarred warrior who had found Takelma at Rebecca's cabin months earlier, was speaking as they entered. "The 3 more patrols spotted within 2 days' travel. They encircle us, tightening like noose." He gestured forcefully. "We should strike first, where they least expect." Several younger warriors voiced agreement, while elders remained thoughtfully silent. Chief Kintwash acknowledged Rebecca and Takelma with a nod as they took their places in the circle. "My son and his wife join us," he announced, temporarily, halting the discussion. The matters we decide affect them greatly. The acknowledgement of Rebecca's status, both as Takelma's wife and as someone with a stake in tribal decisions, reflected her changing position within the community. While some warriors still regarded her with lingering suspicion, her marriage had generally been accepted as legitimate, particularly after she had embraced Modoc customs and demonstrated willingness to learn their ways. What exactly did the scouts discover? Takelma asked, bringing the discussion back to immediate concerns. Black Fox reported in a mixture of Modoc and English, seemingly for Rebecca's benefit. Cavalry has established forward camp at North Ridge. More soldiers arrive daily. They bring howitzers, big guns. Indian scouts search for paths through lava, seeking our location. And the talk of a captive white woman? Takelma pressed. Their commander speaks of the rescue mission, Black Fox confirmed. Says a woman named Rebecca Caldwell, taken by Modoc after helping a wounded warrior. Says she must be found and saved. His scarred face twisted in a grim smile. They offer reward for information. Rebecca absorbed this information with a growing alarm. Her identity and connection to Takelma were clearly known to military authorities, transformed into propaganda that could justify a full assault on the Modoc stronghold. I should go to them, she said suddenly, drawing startled looks from everyone present. Explain that I'm here by choice. Perhaps it would diffuse the situation. No, Chief Kintpuash responded immediately, his tone leaving no room for argument. They would not believe, would say you speak under threat. He shook his head firmly. More likely they would use you for information about our defenses. Then, attack anyway. Your father is right, Takelma added gently. Your willing presence here would be seen as proof of corruption or mental instability, not as evidence of peaceful coexistence. The harsh assessment stung, but Rebecca recognized its truth. Her own society's rigid views on racial separation and proper behavior for white women meant her choices would be seen as incomprehensible at best, treasonous at worst. Then what options remain? She asked, looking around the council circle. If negotiation is impossible and my intervention would be useless, what paths are left besides conflict? An elder named Stonewalker, who had generally been supportive of Rebecca's integration into the tribe, spoke for the first time. Perhaps not direct negotiation, but a message. Written words from white woman to white commanders. Truth that cannot be dismissed as forced speech. The suggestions sparked immediate discussion. Some warriors objected that any communication would reveal too much about their situation. Others argued that military commanders would ignore anything coming from the Modoc, regardless of who authored it. Rebecca listened carefully, then addressed Chief Kintpuash directly. I could write a letter explaining the true circumstances, how Takelma was wounded, how I aided him, how circumstances led to my decision to remain with the tribe. It might not convince everyone, but it could introduce doubt about the captive woman narrative. The chief considered this thoughtfully, his weathered face revealing nothing of his internal deliberations. Finally, he nodded. Words are weapons, and two sometimes more powerful than arrows. Write your letter. We will find a way to deliver it to white commanders. With the matter tentatively decided, the council turned to practical defensive preparations. Maps of the lava beds were drawn in the dirt, with experienced warriors indicating optimal defensive positions and potential vulnerabilities. Supplies were inventoried, water sources secured, and evacuation routes established for non-combatants if military action became inevitable. Throughout the discussions, Rebecca observed the complex dynamics of tribal decision-making. While Chief Kintpuash clearly held ultimate authority, he consistently sought input from various perspectives before making pronouncements. Respected elders like Stonewalker offered wisdom from historical experience, while battle-tested warriors like Black Fox provided tactical assessments. Even younger tribal members occasionally contributed observations or suggestions that were given serious consideration. It was, she realized, a form of governance that balanced respect for established leadership with practical recognition of distributed expertise, quite different from the top-down military hierarchies organizing the forces arrayed against them. When the council concluded, Rebecca and Takelma returned to their dwelling to draft the letter that might represent their last hope for peaceful resolution. With precious paper and ink from Rebecca's few remaining possessions, she carefully composed a message aimed at challenging the prevailing narrative without inflaming tensions further. To the commanding officer of United States Forces, she began, "Formally, my name is Rebecca Caldwell, formerly of Illinois and more recently of a homestead in the Oregon Territory. I understand that military forces have been mobilized partly based on reports that I am being held captive by the Modoc tribe. This letter is written of my own free will to correct this fundamental misunderstanding. In December of last year, I found a wounded Modoc warrior collapsed outside my cabin during a blizzard. Having recently buried my father and finding myself alone in dangerous conditions, I nevertheless provided medical care to this man, who I later learned was Takelma, son of Chief Kintpuash. During the winter months, as Takelma recovered from his wounds, we developed mutual respect. When cavalry forces subsequently burned my cabin and left me without shelter or resources, the Modoc tribe offered me protection and community. I have since married Takelma in a traditional Modoc ceremony, not under coercion, but as a conscious choice between adults. I am not a captive, but a willing member of this community, which has shown me nothing but kindness and respect. I implore you to reconsider military action based on a false premise. The Modoc seek only to maintain their traditional ways in lands they have occupied for generations. They have no desire for conflict, but will defend themselves if attacked. Rather than bloodshed, I urge consideration of peaceful negotiations that acknowledge legitimate Modoc concerns about proposed reservation lands and their rights to maintain their cultural identity. I remain Rebecca Caldwell Reynolds. She had added Takelma's surname, given to him by a missionary teacher who found Reynolds easier to pronounce than his Modoc name, as a deliberate statement of her married status. Takelma read the letter carefully. "It is good," he said finally, "respectful but firm. Whether it will be believed." He let the thought remain unfinished. As darkness fell and stars emerged above their home, Rebecca joined her husband and son, completing the family circle. Together they represented what so many had considered impossible: genuine connection across boundaries of culture, history, and expectation. What had begun with a wounded warrior collapsing at a cabin door during a blizzard had transformed not only their individual lives, but rippled outward to influence two communities previously locked in seemingly inevitable conflict. One act of compassion, one decision to see humanity rather than difference, had altered the course of history, at least for this small corner of the American frontier. And in doing so, it offered a glimpse of what might be possible if others found the courage to build similar bridges across the chasms of misunderstanding that divided so many. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.